Hi all. There is some interest in the tactical unification theory I introduced in the previous video, and I think I'll make this into a little series, a tactical series. And many of the examples will come from this article I wrote for the Ballot Chess Club site many years back. And this is a very intriguing example I'm going to show you. Now, Garry Kasparov was playing against Boris Gelfand in Linares 1993. Linares is one of Kasparov's favourite tournaments. He did fantastically well in that series of events. He dominated that series. In 1993 it was one of the strongest collection of grandmasters at that time. It was a category XVIII event. I think that's category 18. So 14 of the world's top players, including the world champion, competed in a round robin. And so you had Karpov, Anand, Ivanchuk, Gelfand, Kramnik, Bariev, Shirov, Salov, Kamsky, Yusupov, Timon, Belyavsky, Loboyevich. So it was an amazing field. Kasparov ended up winning this tournament, and he played unbelievably dynamic chess. And I guess, I don't know, I think this is a fantastic tactical example, but it's so sophisticated. And I had prefaced this on my Barnet site as before this I was talking about tactical issues, and I'm referring to them under this unification theory as the weaknesses of the pieces, deliberately. If we just keep that label, the weaknesses of the pieces, so we consider, for example, poor king safety. But the king, you could argue, is castled here. Why is the king not safe? Other weaknesses of the pieces that I listed: how can the weak squares around the opponent's king be exploited? Are there weak squares? Is G6 weak? Is this diagonal weak? Is G8 weak? That's an interesting question. Are there really weaknesses around the opponent's king? I think the fundamental point I was making, though, was that the king in itself is a weakness, is a weak piece generally, even if it's castled. Superficially, it might seem a bit safe. I mean, here's a Sicilian defence position where, you know, it does seem fairly safe on this diagonal. There's two pawns here, fairly safe on this file. How can white's pieces actually get to black's king? And other weaknesses of the pieces, which I wasn't applying that label at the time of this article. So basically, it was also leading to questions based on these weaknesses. How can the weak squares around the opponent's king be exploited? What manoeuvres could you play to get to these squares? What are the opponent's king's key defensive pieces? Could these be decoyed or deflected? What lines could be opened against the opponent's king? What are the loose or unprotected pieces? Could I loosen any pieces? Could I encourage any pieces to be unprotected? Overloaded pieces? Could I exploit overloaded pieces? Pin pieces? Can I exploit the pins? Can I create new pins? A particular piece arrangement? Is there something remotely silly about the placement of the opponent's pieces? So there's all these intuitive questions you could ask, but then to look at the strength of our own pieces, we're back to this looking at all the forcing moves. I mean, here actually the strength of this bishop doesn't seem that great if it's biting on granite, right? But we can sacrifice both knights here and open up, blast through to that diagonal on G8. That might be significant. In fact, if we take away this pawn, then G6 is a bit weak. That G6 square is weakened, and the queen's sitting there at the moment pinning that H2 pawn. There is a pinned pawn here. So, but this is fascinating for what happened in the game. It's a very sophisticated game. Bishop B5, and the knight was actually here, and it jumped at D4, offering the rook. So something, Kasparov had already sniffed something was suspect about the position before this. Now, you might ask, well, why didn't Boris just take the rook here? Okay, let's have a look at this position. Bishop takes F1, so it's a rook sacrifice. And white will just be worse if he recaptures. It's not like an intuitive exchange sack. So that there is something Kasparov already sniffed in this position, that something's wrong about the opponent's king. And it seems even more outrageous because otherwise also black might have been threatening A4, you'd think, to win this bishop. I mean, the bishop hasn't got many squares. But it seems in this position, if this had been played and it hadn't been played, white has one move only, it seems. One move only, which guarantees an advantage. And we'd have to look at all the forcing moves. Now, this one, how does it show the strength of our pieces? It doesn't particularly. Black's doing well here. In fact, the queen's attacked, and then you could imagine, you know, what's the problem there? So the key forcing moves seem to be around E6, and we want to maybe blast the line for the bishop. And you might think knight f takes e6, that key forcing move, it does attack the queen, but it seems black might be okay by taking here, because after knight takes e6, is this so punishing? The queen drops back, and you know there's still this a4 on the cards. You know, black's won a rook over here. Is there anything concrete here? And you might start to look at forcing moves here to see the power of the pieces. You might consider, well, knight takes f8 threatens, or does it? No, it doesn't threaten anything in terms of h7, but it does threaten knight g6 checkmate. There is a pinned pawn here, but in this position, black could take here, and this isn't so great here for white. How does white actually proceed the attack? It seems if you look at this diagonal, g8's not that exploitable here. If we take here, then you know the bishop can retract itself maybe to b5, and black might actually be threatening a4 soon as well. So say bishop e7, where's the attack? The attack, you know, needs more steam. You might think rook d5 here. That's another attacking resource, but maybe, you know, black can get control of this position. Say rook d5 might be able to take it on e7 now. So yeah, that's not a problem. So what to do with this bishop? Bishop takes, queen takes, and what's the problem? You know, black's doing great here. There's no problem in that line, but that forcing move, which seems to try and pierce the diagonal, is okay. It's opening up the power of the bishop a little bit, but actually this pinned pawn is more significant. If the knight's there, we're matching the weakness of this pinned pawn with the strength of this knight. So actually there does seem to be another forcing move in knight d takes e6. Because potentially we've got then a knight g6 check resource, which is quite important, very important. How can we easily demonstrate that? Well, if f takes e6, knight g6 check here is not accurate. King g8, this position is okay. Black's got rook f7. Apparently it's tenable, this position. But in this position, in this particular position, on f takes e6, there's another move which doesn't actually it doesn't actually look like it's not an immediate forcing move. It's just threatening a lethal move which threatens mate. Bishop takes threatens a mate in one with knight g6 checkmate, and it's here that black has a lot of difficulties to defend this position. If he tries to give g7 to his king, it doesn't really help. It's still like a mate in two there. So what does black do? Knight h5 is the engine suggestion. White's still better, threatening mate again. Taking that out doesn't really help. White's better here in this position. If the bishop retracted itself, then actually queen e8. So black has to defend the back row here. And here, white is better from the engine assessment. It's significantly better by about +2. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 3, 5, 2 pawns up with the bishop pair. So Boris may have looked at some of this and meekly, actually, instead of taking the bishop on f1, meekly played bishop e8. Now, okay, against Kasparov, most of us on YouTube would definitely just lose. If we're playing against him in Linares, if we ever got there, we'd still just lose, even if we're GMs. So bishop e8, just that's a reality check, really. But bishop e8, Kasparov has also now sensed there's now sort of blockage issues of these pieces. That the rooks are far from being connected. There's now two pieces in the way of the rooks. Yeah, this is not a simple example. There's connection issues, and you might think intuitively, does that make g8 a little bit weaker if there's connection issues? Is that really a weakness here? Well, now it seems in this position after bishop e8, in fact, both forcing moves have major effect. Both d takes and f takes have major effect, And also other forcing moves are also very, very strong. We're talking +3, even e5 first, because there's this kind of pin here with this battery on e7. So we've got a pinned pawn here, we've got a kind of virtually pinned knight here, and there seems to be many ways actually of skinning the cat here, so to speak. Even rook d3 is apparently a very strong move, with just with the idea of swinging the rook, Morozevich type rook. It's a very, very strong position after bishop e8. But how to concretely exploit that? So we start looking at the forcing moves to see the power of our pieces, and it seems, you know, both these have the potential. Both these knight sacks have the potential to open up the bishop on that diagonal. And you know, we can look at both of them maybe. Knight takes f. You know, it's not going to be using that pin, this one, on e6. But even this position is very strong here actually. Because part of this is not just getting two pieces for the rook. You see here there's even more connection issues. There's a slight weakness of the pieces in terms of the king being slightly weaker because of these connection issues. We talk about, you know, rooks not being connected, but here the rook is not connected to the fence of g8, and there's actually a very, very strong looking piece which I know it was on the verge of being trapped, but it's now got c4 here. But in this position it seems as though there's another lethal battery that white can actually create in this position with a key move. So how would you create a battery with the bishop and queen? If I gave you that as a clue, there's a really amazing forcing move here. I know this is like mega tactics, but if I gave you 5 seconds here, what would you consider as an important forcing move in this position? Okay, the most crushing move in this position, and bishop takes f6 is good as well, but e5 is actually the most crushing move. And it does show the strength of the pieces really, because it's blasting the rook down the d file. And not only that, the actual row here for the queen has just been given, the queen has just been given d4 and c4. And c4 is of special significance. That's a battery if we get the queen to c4 and eyeing a sensitive g8 square. This is quite crushing, this position. It seems, you know, very, very difficult for black to kind of you know, defend this position. For example, bishop takes here, takes. It starts to look similar to the game actually, this continuation, but it seems, you know, even queen c4 immediately is strong here, even if there's queen g7. But rook d8 is even stronger here, and what does black do in this position? He is kind of overloaded. If we try and protect the bishop with say knight c6, then queen takes, and if queen here, we're going to take and then take that rook, and if bishop g7, yeah, white has a really crushing move here. This is a very similar variation actually to the game. Can you spot the crushing move? Again, a battery is invoked. 5 seconds. Queen e6. It just looks at g8. I know it's crazy. It just looks at g8. But how does black actually defend g8 here in this position? Say knight e7. Then white in this position is really dominating here. The position is actually, he can even just simply win just taking here. This is enough. This is like +5. Very simple. Is the exchange up. There's even more crushing moves than that. But in the game continuation, actually, Kasparov, he actually maybe played an even more accurate blow to e6. He actually used the d knight. He actually played knight d takes e6, which lets this power of this knight for that pin piece be exploited a bit more. So we see f takes e6, and here accuracy is needed because black is actually defending g6 though with that bishop. So bishop takes e6 is not really doing anything. Black could actually play h6 or knight b7 apparently, and might actually be able to defend. But here knight takes e6, forking queen and rook, queen a7, and we've got this connection issue built up. But Kasparov, instead of taking on f8, he first blasts open. The rook and queen are given more opportunities for attacking weak points with this move e5. You see the move e5 actually in a lot of Tau attacking games, and Spassky. It's one of the favourite moves as a prelude to a devastating attack in the Sicilian defence in terms of pawn moves. It just opens up, the major artillery pieces, the rook and the queen, given this battery opportunity here. You see, it has devastating effect here. And let's see what the game continuation. D takes e5, knight takes f8, threatening here actually. Knight takes, for bishop takes e7, on knight takes there's bishop takes e7. So Boris is in a difficult state here. He takes that back. Now we have bishop takes. He takes that back. And there's it's a very strong position for white here. Technically there's all sorts of moves which actually give white an advantage. But the most crushing and logical to exploit this awkwardness of the disconnection issues with g8 is rook d8, infiltrate with the rook. And how does black actually defend this? This is all now +5 or more from an engine perspective. This position, it's really crushing. In the game, knight d7 was played, and there's really crushing moves here. But can you see the most accurate? If I give you 5 seconds, what would you play in this position? Okay, Kasparov played queen g4. This is even stronger actually than queen c4. So he's actually threatening that makes him 1. And black resigned. On bishop g6, what would you play here? Okay, you can simply just take that with a big advantage, but queen e6 is even more crushing, getting that battery on g8. There's disconnection issues which are being exploited here with that g8 square. Yeah, so it was after queen g4 that Boris resigned. It just seemed from the outset like an ordinary Sicilian defence position. And I think this example, with the castle king, well, after this outrageous knight d4, it seems white has an absolutely crushing position. He seems to have... Kasparov is demonstrating the power of all these pieces through this use of the sacrifice here, which wasn't used. Black's best apparently was bishop d7, but even then, bishop d7, it's not a great position after rook d3. If e5 here, this you might think is tricky to hold h3. Apparently white has a very, very strong move here. Can you guess? Knight h5. So if takes, knight takes here, we're just going to slaughter the black king here. The rook and queen will do the slaughtering. There's nothing for black here. White's now threatening a mate in forward. Bishop takes g7. Say here, we can just play this. So we're threatening takes here and then queen h6. This is a new soft spot, g7. For example, rook takes g7 here, queen h6. Yeah, I mean, it seems from the outset a very unpleasant position to have in the Sicilian, the way Kasparov's played it. He's making use of all these attacking pieces. There's this potential rook lift. This e5 opens up the rook and the queen for battery opportunities. It's an incredibly complex example, and I don't think intuitively we could fathom, simply an intuitive assessment here. We can say, okay, there's echoes of some weak squares around the king. Is there some weaknesses of the king here? Have they been exacerbated by bishop e8? But Kasparov has this knack, as with the other top tactical attacking grandmasters throughout chess history, of exploiting awkward, piece configurations, weaknesses of the pieces, with very, very powerful forcing sequences, which show the pure strength of their pieces. There's this matching underlying, but the looking at all the forcing moves here and choosing the most accurate you know, either knight actually is actually quite destructive here, because it's wrenching open this bishop on the diagonal. So, you know, just to see this again, Kasparov played it with knight d takes e6, f takes, knight takes. I mean, what other choices were there? It's just an incredibly difficult position. So everything was just like wrenched open after bishop takes f6, takes. I mean, it looks as though the queen's like defending with queen g7. Kasparov's interrupting all that with this move rook d8. He's throwing a real spanner in the works there for that queen protecting g7. The knight's now protecting f6, but now this g8. Yeah, I think it's probably out of our reach to play this the strength of these tactics. It's out of most of our reach. Probably watching this video, and to be honest, it's Kasparov playing white against Gelfand. He was extremely destructive when opponents had awkward-looking piece configurations. I think a lot of it must be arrived through forcing move analysis to get this kind of concept, to pick up these real soft spots. Yeah, but from afar, it seems in this position, you know, Kasparov and his choice of opening, it's like razor sharp. You know, this bishop could have been a liability. It could have been there for being trapped, you can argue, but just in time, you know, the lines are kind of all ripped apart. And other alternatives, there wasn't much here, because the queen was attacked. The queen was attacked again. Then this e5, it's forcing moves all the way. So, and here, instead of the bishop being trapped or anything, it's on a killer diagonal. So f6, taking out f6 removes g8 again, weakening g8 again. And then there's this battery opportunity immediately as well with queen c4, which is defendable here with queen g7. So Kasparov's moves even more like accurate here, even though, you know, the engine thinks this is okay as well. If the bishop moved here, rook d8, this is pretty powerful as well for white. We're talking nearly +4, but this is even more accurate the way it's played with rook d8. It's causing disconnection, loads of disconnection issues from g8 and interruption. Though the queen and the rook are now not in contact with key squares, so we get this queen g4. And the bishop, you know, black just resigned here, because actually queen g4 implies queen e6. It's even more accurate than queen c4. On queen c4, I mean, this looks absolutely winning as well. Apparently king g7, we can take here. This position is still, you know, fairly crushing. At minimum, easy check to bring out the king. More incisive apparently is rook d1. Just with the idea of snapping off from d7, for example here, or other ideas if that's protected. Queen g4, here rook d3. The heavy artillery is going to do the job here. I know it's a way out example. Maybe some of you have seen this example before. It's a kind of Sicilian defense destruction job. It's quite instructive for how to blast open the diagonal, I guess, and it shows the power of forcing moves, which show the strength of the pieces, and it's being matched with some very, very subtle underlying weaknesses, including disconnection issues and weaknesses of key squares around the opponent's king. Anyway, I hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.